Hi, I'm Maura. And when I was 9, I broke my leg in my backyard. I thought the worst part would be the pain, but it wasn't. My parents drove me to the hospital, signed a few forms, and never came back. They erased me, changed my name, told the system I was unstable, unworthy of family. Years later, I stood at the head of Colorado's Supreme Court, staring down the same bloodline that once decided I wasn't worth raising. But what happens when the child they tried to delete becomes the judge they have to answer to? It was one of those crisp Colorado spring afternoons where the air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass and the hum of cicadas buzzed just below the surface of silence. I was 9 years old, swinging by myself in our backyard. The rusted chains creaked with each back and forth, and the soles of my sneakers scuffed the dirt where grass had long given up. I'd built a game for myself, a challenge to see if I could touch the top of the fence with my toes. I never could, but I liked pretending. The swing twisted awkwardly midair, and I lost my balance. There was a dull crack, a sickening pop, and pain shot through my left leg like lightning. I hit the ground with a thud that stole the breath from my lungs. My vision blurred with tears as I tried to sit up, but the pain was too sharp. I cried out once, then again, louder. The house stood still, the back door closed, the curtains drawn. I waited. I screamed again. Nothing. Not even the sound of footsteps. Eventually, I dragged myself across the yard, inch by inch, digging my elbows into the dirt. It took me 27 minutes to get to the back porch. I know that because I watched the sky change color from bright blue to an ugly, purplish hue while I waited. When the door finally creaked open, it wasn't concern I saw in my mother's eyes. It was exasperation. "You're being dramatic," she snapped, barely looking at my leg. My father appeared behind her, his tone clipped. "Get in the car, now." They didn't lift me. They didn't ask if I was okay. I hobbled with their help, but mostly by force, into the back seat, where I lay twisted, clutching the side panel, trying not to cry too loudly. Every bump in the road made the pain worse. At the hospital, I expected things would get better. Isn't that what hospitals are for? But the silence continued. They barely looked at me. My father pulled aside a nurse, speaking in low tones. My mother sat stiffly beside me, arms crossed. No eye contact, no touch, just cold silence. "I said stop crying," she whispered, eyes forward. "You're making a scene." Through my blurred vision, I saw my father signing a stack of papers behind a glass window. The nurse nodded, glanced back at me, then handed him a packet. I couldn't hear the words, but the nods were final, like they'd just agreed on the closing of a deal. "We're transferring you," my mother said flatly. "Somewhere that can help you heal properly," I blinked. "You mean, not home?" She didn't answer. My heart pounded. That was the first time I knew something was very, very wrong. The pediatric rehab center was colder than the hospital, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The walls were painted with bright murals of cartoon animals, but they only made the silence more eerie. The nurses were kind, technically, but distant, like they had been told to be careful with me. One evening, while I pretended to be asleep, I overheard 2 nurses talking just outside my door. "She's the one, right? The unstable case?" "Yeah. Parents said she had episodes. Emotional instability, possible trauma history." I didn't know what unstable meant at 9 years old, but I understood one thing clearly. My parents had lied. From then on, every look, every gesture felt different. Even when the staff offered juice or helped adjust my cast, it came with hesitation, like I was a ticking bomb that might go off at any moment. No one said it aloud, but I could feel it. I had been marked. They put me in a single room for privacy. I called it my cave. The window overlooked the parking lot. Every Sunday, I sat on my bed, staring out, hoping to see our red sedan pull in. They never did. The other kids got visits, balloons, coloring books, hugs. I got silence. One nurse, the only one who ever called me sweetheart, saw me watching through the blinds one evening and said gently, "Sometimes, honey, families just don't come back." She meant it to comfort. It didn't. I stopped asking questions. I stopped expecting anything. But I never stopped looking at that parking lot. A few weeks later, I was being moved to another wing for physical therapy. A file was accidentally handed to me by a distracted intern. My name was on the cover. Curious, I opened it. There, in black and white, it read, "Family contact preference. Do not notify. Do not return." That was it. I stared at the words until they blurred. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry. I was numb. That was the moment I knew I had been left behind on purpose, and not just physically, legally, officially. They didn't forget me. They removed me. The day they signed me away didn't feel like a breaking point. Not right away. It felt more like a door slowly closing behind me, softly, without a sound. But in the days that followed, when I kept looking back, hoping for it to crack open again, I realized it had been locked. Not with anger, not even with shame, just indifference. The first week in the pediatric center, I kept a little mental calendar. I circled Sunday in my head, church day, family day, the day people usually came to visit. I watched the other kids get surprise drop-ins, a dad with balloons, a grandma with a homemade pie, a mom with a new jacket because it might be cold in here, baby. I smiled for them. I clapped when one of the boys got a remote control truck. By Sunday night, I was still waiting. On Monday morning, I asked the nurse, Miss Carla, if maybe my parents had called. She avoided my eyes. "Let's not raise your hopes, sweetheart. Maybe next weekend, okay?" That maybe carried a weight I didn't understand until I heard another nurse mutter it again behind a clipboard when they thought I was asleep. It wasn't just that they didn't come. It was that no one expected them to. Not anymore. One morning, a new intern named Jenna accidentally handed me a file that wasn't mine. It had my name, Maura Donnelly, on a label that had been partially peeled off and retyped beneath. Inside was a typed document that read, "Family visitation rights. Suspended indefinitely, per parental directive." At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Why would they need to sign something like that? Why formalize not showing up? It didn't sink in until I reread the phrasing 3 times. They didn't just leave me. They had legally barred themselves from returning. They chose not to be allowed. I folded the page and slid it under my mattress. That was the first paper I ever hid. Not because I was scared of getting caught, but because I knew I had to remember it. One day, I'd need proof that what I was feeling wasn't in my head. About a week later, Amanda tried to visit me. Amanda was in my class at school. We weren't best friends, but she was the only person who let me sit next to her without sighing. Her parents brought her after church. I didn't know they were coming, but someone buzzed the front desk, asking for me. I never saw her. They turned her away. The receptionist told her parents I had restricted social contact due to my condition. I overheard that too. And I overheard Amanda crying, asking if she could at least leave me a note. She didn't know what I'd done. I didn't either. I just knew I was radioactive. That evening, a nurse slipped into my room, left a small pack of fruit snacks on my tray, and whispered, "Sorry about earlier. It's not you, sweetie. Some families just set boundaries." Boundaries. That's what they were calling it now. I tried writing a letter. I started with, "Dear Mom and Dad," but scratched it out halfway through the second sentence. I rewrote it. 5 drafts. 6. I finally settled on something polite. No begging. Just a quiet update. It came back 2 days later, unopened. Return to sender in thick red ink. The next day, I asked Miss Carla if I could call home. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other and mumbled something about doctor approval. Later that night, I heard her explain to a supervisor that my phone privileges were on hold for emotional regulation concerns. The wall wasn't made of bricks. It was made of policies, signatures, quiet decisions no one had the decency to say aloud. They kept building it, one form at a time, and I let them. A month in, I heard one of the therapists talking outside my room. "She doesn't have anyone. We should prepare her for long-term separation. That hit differently. I looked around the room that night. The bookshelf with 2 books I'd read 3 times. The chair no one ever sat in. The nightstand with no flowers, no photos. I took a pillowcase and quietly started stuffing my things inside. My notebook, my socks, a plastic comb. I didn't know where I was going, but I wanted something ready, just in case. Maybe I thought that if I pretended I had somewhere to run, I'd stop feeling like I was trapped. It became my version of a go-bag, my proof that I still believed in escape. Later that week, a nurse I didn't recognize walked in after dinner with an envelope. No expression, just handed it to me and walked out. Inside was a typed note from a social worker. Per family request, Maura Donnelly will be treated as a ward of the state, effective immediately. I folded it neatly and placed it in the same spot under the mattress. Then I whispered to the ceiling, "So that's it. I'm no longer anyone's anything." They didn't just leave me behind. They buried me under paperwork. 3 months in, I was called into the intake office for what they said was a routine file update. Nothing major. Just a check-in, they said. New staff. Protocol. I nodded like I always did when adults gave vague instructions with pleasant tones. I sat on the hard plastic chair across from a nurse who looked too young to be tired, but already was. She fumbled with a stack of folders until she found mine, or what I thought was mine. "Marie Lee Bell?" she asked, not looking up. I blinked. "No, Maura Donnelly." She hesitated, then gave me a strained smile, one of those smiles you learn not to trust after a while. "Well, this is the name we have on record. That's what your guardians requested." My stomach twisted. I didn't say anything else. I took the chart and stared at it while she typed something into the computer. My name, the one I'd carried since birth, wasn't just missing. It had been replaced. Neatly. Officially. Later that evening, after dinner, I waited until the halls quieted down and the staff changed shifts. The office doors were usually locked, but the filing cabinet near the end of the hall wasn't. I'd watched enough to know that. I snuck out barefoot, heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake the whole floor. The cabinet squeaked when I opened it, but I kept going, fingers shaking as I flipped through folders. I found it. Mine. Or, what used to be mine. There was a document near the front, stamped in blue, labeled Permanent Protective Identity Request. Signed, Leland Beck, my father. The language was cold, clinical. Subject to be identified by alternate alias for all non-legal uses. The rest blurred under my tears, but the meaning was sharp as glass. In the margins, a note from someone, I don't know who, read, "Better for her, less emotional dependency." That line stayed with me longer than the signature. When I returned to my room, I curled up under the sheet, holding the file to my chest. I stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering what name they'd say at my funeral. It hit me later that week, during group therapy. A volunteer had asked me to introduce myself. I hesitated. My throat tightened. "I'm Marie," I said, my voice low. It felt like ash on my tongue. No one blinked. No one cared. And that made it worse. That night, I took the broken red crayon from the art bin and wrote Maura inside my pillowcase. Over and over, small, faded, like a whisper, like a name trying not to disappear. A few days after, I met someone who changed the shape of my silence. Her name was Sandra, a volunteer who usually helped pass out snacks during movie night. She had kind eyes, the kind that scanned a room instead of skipping it. One evening, she saw me reading through an old pamphlet about juvenile rights. She knelt next to me and whispered, "You really like that kind of stuff?" I nodded. Later, when no one was around, she slipped me into the record room. She said she wasn't supposed to, but some girls deserve to know what's been written about them. Inside my chart, I found something new, something worse. A document labeled Psychological Observation Summary. It described me as emotionally detached, claimed I had self-isolation tendencies and possible risk of harm to self or others. It was signed by Dr. Redlin. I didn't know him, but I remembered the name from a picture in my father's office years ago. They'd played golf together. My jaw locked. I reread every word, slowly. It wasn't just abandonment, it was sabotage. They built a case to erase me, to make sure no one would ask questions if I disappeared. I wasn't lost. I was nullified, neatly, legally. After Sandra left, I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time. I looked around my room, the blank walls, the clipboard hanging by my door with Marie Bell typed in big block letters. I opened my drawer and checked every document I could get my hands on. My birth certificate? Gone. Anything with Maura Donnelly? Not a trace. The staff had stopped calling me Maura weeks ago. I hadn't noticed until it was too late. I didn't even correct them anymore. That night, someone slid a note under my door. Just a slip of paper, no name, no return. It said, "Sometimes names come back, when those who stole them are made to answer." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it in my shoe, right under the sole, and whispered, "Then I'll make them answer." They hadn't just taken my name. They'd taken the sound of it, too. It had been weeks, maybe months, since anyone had said Maura out loud. Not a nurse, not a counselor, not even me. But somewhere beneath the plastered smile I wore in therapy sessions and the polite nod I gave when someone called me Marie, something stubborn was growing. After the cast came off and my limp faded, they moved me to a different ward, one where the doors weren't always locked and the nurses no longer hovered like guards. It was supposed to be a step forward. For me, it was a new opportunity. Once a week, a rolling cart of donated books would rattle through the hallway. Most of the other kids grabbed picture books or mystery novels. I spotted one that was different, older, heavier, with a cracked blue spine and pages yellowed at the edges. It was titled Basic Legal Rights for Minors. I didn't grab it right away. I waited until nobody else wanted it, then asked if I could borrow it. The nurse barely looked up from her clipboard when she nodded. I smuggled it into my room like it was contraband. That night, under the glow of my desk lamp, I flipped open to the first chapter. The print was small and dense, but I devoured it. I didn't understand all the words, yet, but I understood enough. If I was erased on paper, I whispered to myself, maybe paper could bring me back. Each evening, after lights out, I copied sections by hand onto lined paper I begged from the art supply closet. I wrote slowly, deliberately, committing every phrase to memory. When I ran out of paper, I tore the blank backs off old newsletters. One night, I didn't hear Nurse Donna's footsteps until it was almost too late. She opened the door halfway before I snapped the book shut and shoved the papers under my pillow. "What are you reading, Marie?" My heart raced. I hesitated, then looked her dead in the eye. "Something I should have read a long time ago." She tilted her head, unconvinced. "That doesn't look like a bedtime story." "It's not," I said, steadying my voice. "It's about how not to stay erased." Donna didn't press further. She just stood there for a moment too long, then flipped the light switch and walked away. 2 days later, during a group outing, we were allowed outside the facility grounds under staff supervision. Most of the kids ran to the swings in the nearby park, but I noticed something across the street. An old red brick building with wide glass windows and a large open sign. The public library. I pointed it out to one of the aides. She hesitated, then said, "You can sit inside, but stay near the door. I'll be right here on the bench." That hour changed everything. Inside, the smell of dust and aging paper wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I didn't browse. I marched straight to the nonfiction aisle and began scanning spines. Civil rights. Constitutional law. Juvenile protection statutes. Words that once made me feel small now felt like bricks I could build something with. I visited the library every chance I got. At first, I sat alone in the corner, head buried in thick volumes. But after a few visits, I noticed someone watching. An older man, well-dressed but modest, with sharp eyes and kind wrinkles. He never spoke, just sat at a table nearby with his own stack of books. One afternoon, as I reached for a worn-out copy of Rights of the Child in America, he stepped forward. "You know," he said softly, "most kids your age are more interested in Harry Potter." I didn't look up. "Most kids my age didn't get legally erased." He paused, then offered a faint smile. "Fair enough." We talked. His name was Virgil Keene, a retired judge who now volunteered part-time at the library. He never asked why I was reading what I read. He only asked what I wanted to understand. "I want to know how not to disappear," I said. He nodded. "Then start with due process." That became our arrangement. Every Saturday, he met me at the same table. We didn't talk about my family. He never asked about my past. He only brought words, big ones, and explained them until they weren't scary anymore. "Identity suppression," he said one week. "Legal reintegration," another. "Statutory guardianship." "Protective order abuse." He never used pity. He offered me something better. Tools. I promised not to tell anyone. He didn't need promises, just my commitment. Each week, I copied notes into the margins of my old book. When I ran out of room, I started scribbling definitions into the lining of my coat sleeves. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly difficult session on case law, I sat quietly, flipping through the pages. Virgil stood to leave, but paused when he saw the tension on my face. "You okay, kid?" I looked up, the book resting on my lap. "Someday, I'm going to speak in the places they tried to silence me." He didn't respond, just nodded once, the way a mentor does when they know a student doesn't need encouragement, just space. That night, in my room, I opened the old blue book. On the inside cover, in red crayon, I wrote the words slowly, deliberately, for the first time since they'd taken it from me. Property of Maura Donnelly. Hope is a tricky thing. It doesn't knock on your door gently. It slips in when you're not paying attention, dressed like something ordinary. It had been almost a year since the last time I'd heard someone mention a possible foster placement. But one morning, I overheard two nurses in the hallway near the vending machine. They spoke quietly, but I'd become skilled at hearing things not meant for me. "She's eligible for trial placement now," one said. The other sighed. "Poor thing, let's hope this one sticks." That was all I needed. I didn't ask questions, I didn't dare. But that night, I folded a clean shirt and put it beside my pillow. I even polished my shoes with the corner of my blanket. I didn't expect love. I just hoped they wouldn't return me like a damaged order. 2 days later, a man and woman showed up, smiling, cautious. Their names were Peter and Julia. She wore a pale yellow sweater and clutched her purse with both hands like it was a shield. He kept checking his watch, but nodded when the staff spoke. We sat in a room together for all of 20 minutes. They asked what my favorite color was. I said blue. They smiled. "Do you like pets?" Julia asked. "I used to," I said. They didn't ask what happened to the pet. I didn't offer it. By that afternoon, I was riding in the back seat of their car, the window cracked just enough to smell the outside air. It felt surreal, like I'd been plucked from a script I hadn't agreed to. Their home was tidy. Too tidy. The kind of clean that made you afraid to touch things. Dinner was meatloaf and peas. They spoke in calm, overly measured tones. Peter said, "We're excited to have you with us." Julia added, "Let's just take it one day at a time, okay?" I nodded. It wasn't warmth, but it was motion. For 3 days, I sat at a dinner table and used real silverware. I folded towels and placed them where I was told. I said thank you, even when I didn't mean it. I avoided asking too many questions. On the 4th day, I came downstairs to find my bag packed and sitting by the door. Julia wouldn't look at me. Peter cleared his throat. "We weren't informed about certain things," he said stiffly. "It's not what we expected." I stood there, shoes unlaced, heart pounding in my chest. He tried to soften it. It's not your fault. We just aren't the right match. I understand, I whispered. But I didn't. Not really. Because what they meant was, someone told them I came with warnings about my mental state, my history. Later, back at the facility, the therapist sat me down. She tried to speak gently, like she was delivering sad news about a goldfish. It's not you, Maura, she said. It's the system. Sometimes, when certain labels are in a file, people get scared. What labels? I asked. She hesitated. Things like emotional instability or attachment disorder. It doesn't mean they're true, but they're in the file. She nodded slowly. After she left, I pulled out my notes from Virgil. I flipped through them until I found a term he'd scribbled and underlined twice. Diagnostic placement denial. I didn't fully grasp it yet, but I knew this wasn't about me not being lovable. It was about how easy it was for people to write someone off once a few phrases were typed into a chart. The next week, a new social worker came by. She was young, nervous, and clutched a manila folder with my name, or rather, my new name, printed on the tab. We're updating some records, she said. She sat across from me and slid a single-page document forward. It read, Voluntary Waiver of Parental Reunification Rights. What is this? I asked, staring at the legalese. It's just a formality, she said too quickly. You're already in state custody, and this just makes it official that there's no expectation of reconnecting. I read it again, then again. You want me to sign this? It helps move things forward, she said, and at your age, you're eligible to consent. I was 10. They were handing me the pen because it looked better if I let go instead of them. I signed, and I kept a copy, slipped it under my mattress beside the others. That night, Virgil found me at the library again. I showed him the form. There's a law for everything, he said, almost like it was a joke. Even forgetting someone. That's when I started my own project. I called it the Rejection Files. Every name, every date, every signature that moved me further from a family and closer to a system. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but I knew it mattered. At bedtime, I circled a word in my law textbook. Emancipation. If they made me a legal orphan, I whispered to myself, then one day, I'll become my own guardian. The bus ride downtown took 32 minutes. I timed it. Every single day. Not because I liked routine, but because I needed control over something, even if it was just the rhythm of passing streetlights. After my 10th birthday, I was placed into a transitional foster home. It wasn't a house. It was a monitored dorm-style unit for teens who didn't have placement potential, as they like to call it. I had a bed, a key to a shared bathroom, and for the first time, access to public transportation. That bus pass was my first taste of freedom. The downtown Denver Public Library became my sanctuary. I'd sit in the third row of the legal reference section, tucked between the shelves of old codes and legal dictionaries, scribbling notes into a thrift store notebook I'd bought with the quarters I'd saved. No one asked why a 12-year-old was reading about family law and juvenile rights. They just smiled and passed by. That was their first mistake. At school, I was registered under Marie L. Bell, the same name stamped across my social file, my ID card, and the outdated folder that every guidance counselor flipped open like it was a roadmap to failure. When I signed up for GED prep at a community center, they asked if I wanted to be part of the Scholar Spotlight. It would highlight resilient youth who overcame adversity, they said. I declined. What's your name again? The coordinator asked. That depends on who's asking, I said without blinking. I didn't want their spotlight. Spotlights burned, and I'd had enough of being used to warm someone else's hands. Virgil still met me every Saturday at the library. He'd bring books from his private collection, the kind with margins already annotated in fading ink. One afternoon, he caught me ripping pages out of a brochure I found on a side table. Something interesting? he asked, eyeing the torn paper. I handed it to him. It was a grant proposal pamphlet for the youth facility I'd just aged out of. On the cover was my face, an old photo from a group art day. The headline read, "From Broken to Brilliant, How We Gave Her Wings." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. They wanted to show they saved me, I said, but no one saved me. Virgil read the line again, then folded the paper slowly. Then speak louder than their version. Make it so yours is the one that sticks. So I did. I started writing under a pseudonym, submitting op-eds to teen advocacy sites and underground newsletters. I never used names. I didn't have to. The systems I described were universal enough to feel personal to anyone who'd lived them. At 14, I entered a national legal essay competition. My topic was the ethics of psychiatric labeling in foster youth evaluations. I submitted it anonymously, no name, no story. I placed in the top 10. They invited me to a summer legal prep program at a prestigious university, but the application required a family endorsement, signature from a parent or legal guardian. I declined the invitation. Sometimes winning just showed you how far you still were from being free. Later that fall, I walked into the clerk's office after school, heart pounding like it used to when I opened old files in secret. There was a woman behind the glass counter, typing with long coral-colored nails. "I'd like to start the process to legally restore my birth name," I said. She paused mid-keystroke, raising one eyebrow. "You got proof that it was ever yours?" I pulled out a small folded sheet from my wallet, the inside cover of a blue book, worn and creased. In red crayon it read, "Property of Maura Donnelly." She looked at it, then back at me. "Well," she said slowly, "that's certainly a start." And just like that, the system that had erased me would have to learn to spell my name again. There's a strange thing that happens when you walk back into the very halls that once locked you out. You become a ghost in reverse, not haunting them, but forcing them to remember you exist. I was 19, barely into my second semester of the law program, when I got placed for my externship rotation at the county courthouse. The assignment felt like some cosmic joke. I stared at the email on the university screen for a full minute before I exhaled. Same system, same building, same power structure that had once erased me. I checked in at the front desk under the name they still knew me by, Marie L. Bell. The same alias that had been assigned to me years ago and stubbornly clung to my records like static. I didn't correct it, not yet. My first assignment was to assist during procedural hearings for a judicial review board. Nothing flashy. Mostly paperwork and quiet observation. That suited me fine. Then I saw the name on the docket. Judge Owen Beck. I remembered him from faded photo albums, the kind I had to reconstruct in my mind. My father's older brother, a man with a sharp nose and colder eyes. He'd never spoken to me directly when I was a child. He was always too busy playing the game of respectability. His gaze had passed over me at family events, the way one glances at a lamp in a hallway. Necessary, but not noteworthy. That day, I watched him take his seat at the head of the panel, robes crisp, hair too perfectly parted. He flipped through the case folder, but when his eyes scanned the table and landed on mine, something flickered. Just for a second. His jaw clenched. Subtle, but I noticed. He didn't say anything then. But hours later, in the hallway near the service elevator, we crossed paths again. No witnesses. He looked straight at me and murmured, "You look familiar." I met his gaze without hesitation. "I doubt it. I've been invisible for years." He flinched slightly, but true to form, he said nothing more and kept walking. That moment didn't shake me. It centered me. Back at the university library, I met with Virgil. I told him what happened. "You're not obligated to reveal anything," he said calmly. "Power isn't in being seen. It's in deciding when, and if, you want to be." He was right. I didn't want recognition. I wanted ownership. I began drafting legal memos for class using anonymous childhood case examples, ones that sounded an awful lot like my own. I cited state laws that had once been used to silence me, No one caught on. Or if they did, no one asked. Then came the justice event. The university had partnered with several local nonprofits for a community reform summit. I was assigned to help with speaker coordination, check-ins, and media prep. I accepted out of duty, not interest. I wasn't expecting to see her. I'd been handing out lanyards when I glanced up and froze. Isolde Beck, my mother. She walked in wearing a blazer the color of polished steel, lips pressed tight, like she'd rehearsed her arrival. A name tag labeled her as Executive Director, Family Future Foundation. The room suddenly felt 5 degrees colder. Our eyes locked. A second, maybe 2. She blinked. Her jaw didn't move. No surprise, no smile, not even a twitch of discomfort. And then, she turned away, like I was part of the decor. Something forgettable, something staged. She didn't say Maura. She didn't say anything, but her eyes. They screamed, "Don't you dare exist here." Later that day, during a breakout session, there was an optional speaker sign-up for youth representatives. I wrote my name, my real name, Maura Donnelly. I did it deliberately, in ink, large enough to be read without squinting. When the list was posted, my name was gone. No explanation, no scratch-out, just erased. I didn't confront anyone, I didn't scream, but I made a mental note of the intern who collected the papers, the one who smiled too much and avoided my eyes after. This wasn't silence. This was censorship in a smile. Toward the end of the event, I stood in the main corridor, watching attendees shuffle out. I was numb, detached. Then, I heard a name whispered in passing. Deacon Rayner. I turned. My younger brother, now taller, sharper in the shoulders, still too smooth in the jaw to look like a real adult, was exiting a boardroom. A staffer followed him with a clipboard, nodding at everything he said. He didn't see me. He didn't need to. That was what chilled me. Not his gaze, but the absence of it. Like I never existed in his world. Like the hole they carved in the family tree had always been there, neat and intentional. And maybe, for them, it had. But I wasn't that hole anymore. I wasn't the ghost they left behind. I was something else. And I no longer wanted to be part of their legacy. I wanted to dismantle it. The invitation came in a stiff ivory envelope with gold embossing that tried too hard to impress. Inside was the formal announcement: "You are cordially invited to attend the Colorado State Legal Honors Night, nominated for Young Legal Innovator of the Year." I stared at the card for 10 minutes. Not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because I did. This wasn't just a gala. This was a stage, and I'd spent my life building toward it while they thought I was still crawling through the shadows. I almost didn't go. Not because I was afraid, because I wasn't sure if revenge ever came wrapped in ballroom lighting. But in the end, I didn't go for them. I went for the version of myself who slept under state roofs and memorized statutes by flashlight. I wore a black dress with an open back and a silver M-shaped pin clipped just over my heart. Not Marie, not Belle, Maura. The Denver Civic Center gleamed under the floodlights, buzzing with media, dignitaries, and people who only spoke in job titles. As I stepped onto the edge of the red carpet, I heard the crowd murmur. My name hadn't been announced yet, but hers had. Isolde Beck. She stood beside Deacon, all polished grace, giving a live interview like she'd been training for it since the cradle. A reporter leaned in with a smile too white to be sincere. "There's a rumor you had a third child. Any truth to that?" Isolde chuckled. Not nervous, not unsure. Pure poise. "No, that's incorrect. My husband and I have 2 wonderful children. That's all." My chest didn't tighten. My breath didn't hitch. But something inside me shifted, like a gear finally clicking into place. I watched the screen above the entrance replay her smile in slow motion while guests clapped around me. She hadn't just erased me. She'd done it beautifully, on record. I walked into the ballroom with quiet confidence, unscanned, unnoticed. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to be remembered. Across the room, Deacon was in his element, shaking hands and leaning into cameras like he'd been born under a spotlight. He didn't see me. None of them did. The host took the stage, smiling too broadly. The room dimmed. Glasses clinked. People shushed one another as the announcement began. "And now," the host said, "for a name most of you don't know, but you should." The spotlight swung across the crowd and landed on me. At first, there was silence. Then, murmurs. The big screen behind the stage flashed in elegant type. Maura Donnelly, legal systems reformer. I rose. Deacon dropped his champagne flute. Isolde didn't move. The room parted like the Red Sea as I walked down the center aisle. Every click of my heel was a drumbeat. By the time I reached the stage, the murmuring had stopped. You could hear the tension hanging in the air, heavy and electric. I stepped up to the mic. The host moved aside. She wasn't sure what I was going to say. Neither was I. Until the words came. "I wasn't raised by mentors," I began. "I was erased by family." Gasps. Audible now. "But erasure doesn't hold up well under cross-examination." Silence again. I scanned the crowd, locking eyes with a few faces I recognized from courtrooms, from law journals, from memories. And then I let the stillness sit, just long enough for everyone to feel its weight. "I didn't come here tonight to reclaim a seat at their table," I said, voice calm, unwavering. "I built my own." Applause didn't explode. It crept in, one table at a time. A lawyer near the front stood first, then another, then a ripple. But I didn't stay to bask in it. I turned. The camera, still broadcasting live, panned across the room and landed on her. Isolde Beck stood up slowly. Her eyes locked with mine, then flicked away. She turned, stepped out from the table, and walked toward the exit with that same practiced grace. But this time, the lights followed me. The morning after the gala, my inbox overflowed like a dam finally breached. Half were congratulations. The other half came off the record, quiet inquiries cloaked in politeness. Colleagues who had ignored my presence now wanted to touch base. Journalists who had never returned a single pitch were suddenly circling back. Some simply wanted to ride the wave. I ignored most of them, but one email stood out. The subject line read, "Bar Ethics Forum, Keynote Request." They wanted me to speak at the upcoming Colorado Bar Association's legal ethics event. Topic, institutional erasure and judicial integrity. The irony? It wasn't even meant to be ironic. They thought they were doing me a favor. I accepted. Not to be gracious, not for visibility. I did it because there was a file locked away since 1995 that needed sunlight, and I had memorized every page. 2 months later, I stood on stage in a room filled with suits who once said I'd never belong among them. The event was being live-streamed, cameras discreet but present. I opened with statistics on biased psychiatric labeling in foster youth, citing cases and legislation. Then I paused. "This," I said, holding up a sealed manila folder, "is from 1995. A state-archived file detailing the diagnosis of a minor flagged as emotionally unstable and a danger to herself." I opened the folder and held up a photocopy. It was fabricated, written by a physician with a long-standing relationship to the child's father, Dr. Leland Beck. The room went still. Only a few pen clicks dared to break the silence. "These weren't diagnostic notes," I continued. "They were exit strategies, written not to help the child, but to remove her from the narrative cleanly." It took seconds. Murmurs spread like wildfire. A reporter in the back started typing. One of the legal aides near the door whispered to another, eyes wide. The live stream feed began trending with a single phrase. She was the case. I didn't smile. I didn't break. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here because records matter, because no child should be erased on paper simply because the truth makes adults uncomfortable." I closed the folder gently and stepped back. That night, while I sat on the porch of my small apartment above the legal aid clinic, Sipping black tea and letting the adrenaline fade, my phone lit up. A video had resurfaced, one I hadn't seen in years. It was from Deacon's wedding. In it, my mother was caught on camera, off to the side of the reception tent, speaking into her phone. Don't let her show up in any photos. She never belonged in this family. It wasn't just that she said it. It was how she said it, like the final clause in a legal settlement. The clip was picked up by local news within hours, spliced side by side with my speech from the forum. Public sentiment shifted fast. Donors began pulling out of Isolde's nonprofit. Dr. Beck was quietly removed from his position on the State Medical Ethics Board. Deacon was placed on indefinite leave from his firm, while internal audits were conducted. I said nothing. I continued working cases at the clinic, defending teenagers like I once was, too smart for their own good, and already halfway convinced no one would ever listen. A week later, a letter arrived, handwritten. The paper yellowed slightly, with age. Return address, G. Holloway, Gwen. Inside was a note, just one line. I remember the day they left you behind. I've kept a copy of the intake form. Let me testify. I read it twice, and this time I didn't whisper anything. I folded the letter neatly, placed it on my desk, and pulled out a clean legal pad. Now it wasn't just my word against theirs. It was testimony. When Gwen's letter arrived, I didn't open it right away. It sat on my desk for 3 days, the envelope slightly curled at the corners, the return address handwritten in shaky but deliberate cursive. I recognized the name instantly. Gwen Holloway, the nurse from that first facility, the one who tucked fruit snacks onto my tray, and once told me, "Sometimes, honey, families just don't come back." When I finally slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the paper, there was only one line. I remember the day they left you behind. I've kept a copy of the intake form. Let me testify. I stared at it for a long time. Then I reached for the intake file I'd been collecting piece by piece for years. The sealed evaluations, the photos, the fake diagnosis reports, the documented forged signature from Dr. Leland Beck. All of it carefully preserved in a fireproof box, tucked under my bed for over a decade. Now was the time. The Colorado Bar Ethics Review Panel was opening hearings on judicial and medical conflicts of interest. It wasn't a courtroom, but it might as well have been. The room was lined with chairs facing a long table of decision-makers, lawyers, judges, and former investigators. I sat at the witness table across from them, calm and deliberate, dressed in charcoal gray. I didn't wear black. That would have made it look like I was grieving. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was finishing what they started. As I laid the documents out across the table, my voice didn't tremble. I walked the panel through each page like it was evidence in a deposition, which, functionally, it was. This report, I said, tapping one sheet, was submitted by Dr. Beck in 1995. It labels a 9-year-old girl as unstable and a risk to herself and others. It was never peer-reviewed. It was used to block visitation, suppress identity, and enable illegal custody transfer. I lifted my gaze to the panel. That girl was me. A ripple went through the room. And this, I said, pulling out Gwen's signed affidavit, is from the nurse who admitted me that same day. She confirms there were no behavioral concerns, no prior incidents, and no psychological history. Until this. I let the silence do what it does best. They didn't forget me, I said. They constructed a narrative where forgetting me was just easier to explain. The next day, headlines broke before I even left the courthouse. By the time I returned to the clinic, my name was trending on legal news sites nationwide. Gwen's testimony was made public with her consent. The intake form, a carbon copy, yellowed with age, was displayed next to the forged psychological summary. The impact was swift. The Colorado Medical Board revoked Dr. Beck's license, citing falsification of medical documents with intent to defraud state custody procedures. The nonprofit run by Isolde folded within days after donors pulled support en masse, citing public mistrust. And Deacon? He released a bland statement distancing himself from the family's historical practices, claiming he'd had no knowledge of the events in question. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I submitted my final affidavit to the state's Legal Oversight Committee. I signed it simply, Maura Donnelly, no more aliases, no more silence. 1 week later, I packed a sealed cardboard box. Inside, I placed torn photographs, ones where my face had been scratched out. I added the fake school reports, the Marie ID badge, and a copy of the waiver I was pressured to sign when I was 10. I sealed the box with thick brown tape. No return address, no note. Except one, folded in half on top. This doesn't belong to me anymore. I left it with a courier addressed to the Beck's last known P.O. box. Then I went to work. 2 weeks later, the ethics report was finalized. I was asked to sign off as a contributor. At the bottom of the form, there was a line marked, Affiliated Family Background. I paused, pen hovering. Then I wrote, None. Raised by silence, mentored by truth. And for the first time in years, I exhaled. Because it was written, because it was signed, because it was done. The silence afterward was expected. And still, it stung in its own way. No press release, no apology tour, no shaky confessionals on morning talk shows. The Becks did what they'd always done best, vanish into silence, and let the world assume their dignity had been bruised by misinterpretation. But I knew better. My inbox bloomed with subject lines like, Thinking of you, just wanted to say, and incredible work. Mixed in were awkward olive branches, soft-spoken legal peers trying to slide into my world like nothing had happened. I didn't respond to any of them. Apologies offered out of shame aren't owed a reply. On a cold Friday morning, a new envelope arrived. Ivory cardstock, my name handwritten across the front in a script I hadn't seen since I was a child. Isolde's handwriting. I let it sit on my desk all weekend. I didn't fear the contents. I just didn't want to dignify the energy it had cost her to write it. Monday, I opened it. There was no salutation, no acknowledgement of time past. Just this. I thought I was protecting the family name. I didn't realize what it would cost. I read it once. Then again. She never said sorry, not once. Not for the false records, not for the cold hallway stares, not even for the line she spoke at Deacon's wedding. Just a soft brush-off wrapped in regret. And yet, it didn't make me angry. Not anymore. That part of me had grown tired. I was the cost, I said aloud, tossing the letter into a drawer. I'm the name that didn't fit the frame. The next day, Deacon showed up, unannounced. It was just after lunch, and I was sorting through a file of housing discrimination cases. My assistant cracked the door. Maura, there's someone here, says he's family. That word didn't land right. I stood, walked to the glass entry, and saw him, still perfectly dressed, tie loose like he wanted to look casual, but had no idea how. I opened the door an inch. No appointment, I said flatly. I know, he replied, almost sheepish. I just needed to say something. I didn't let him in. I didn't step out. I didn't know everything, he continued. I should have asked more. I should have done more. Through the glass, he added quietly, I didn't have the courage then. You did. That's the difference. I didn't speak. I didn't nod. I just closed the door and locked it. 3 days later, a new intake came into the clinic. 14 years old, eyes sharper than her age should have allowed. She sat across from me, her hands fidgeting with a cracked phone case. My mom says I was born broken, she said, her voice too flat to be performing. I looked her in the eye. Your value doesn't come from who failed to see it, I said. It comes from you remembering it. She didn't respond, but she stopped fidgeting. That year, I hosted Thanksgiving for the first time. It wasn't large, just Gwen, Virgil, 2 of my paralegals and their families, a law student I'd mentored who didn't want to spend the day alone. No blood, no matching sweaters, no awkward tension beneath polite small talk. Virgil raised a glass mid-meal. "Some of us are born into families," he said. "Others rise out of their wreckage to build better ones." Everyone raised their glasses. I just smiled. That night, after the dishes were done and the last laugh echoed out the door, I pulled open the drawer in my desk, the one where Isolde's letter sat. I didn't reread it. I slid it into a plain envelope and sealed it. Across the front, I wrote, "Do not return to sender. Let it stay lost." And then I tucked it back into the drawer I no longer needed to open. They said I didn't belong. So I built the room. The marble floors echoed under my heels as I stepped into the chamber. Rows of dark suits lined the hearing hall. Judges, deans, bar officials, all watching as I approached the center podium for confirmation. I wore navy, not black, not white. Navy, because it felt like clarity. Behind me, the memories trailed like a second shadow. My father muttering I wasn't equipped for real academia. My mother once saying I was too unstable to be public-facing. Those echoes didn't disappear, but they no longer had teeth. I took the oath slowly, clearly, each word deliberate. When the Chief Justice gestured for my remarks, I stood tall, voice even. "I was once erased by a family too afraid to see the truth," I said. "Today, I'm here because the truth didn't stay buried." There were no dramatic gasps, no standing ovation, just a steady silence, the kind that means they heard me. When it was done, I walked down the hall toward my new office. I paused at the clerk's desk to sign my first official motion. Title: Petition to remove fraudulent and biased records from state archives. It passed by noon. By end of week, the Beck name had been formally stripped from every state juvenile funding registry and every record tied to my case. Clean, public, permanent. They didn't see that coming, and I didn't need them to. A month later, Westfield University invited me to deliver their commencement address. In the same envelope, they proposed a scholarship in my name, the Donnelly Honor Grant. I said yes. On one condition: the grant would be awarded exclusively to youth legally severed from guardianship due to abuse or abandonment. I wanted it to go to the kids no one took pictures of. 2 weeks before the ceremony, I received an RSVP list. At the bottom was her name: Isolde Beck. Uninvited. I stood in the Supreme Court rotunda, reviewing documents before a case review meeting. I looked up, and there she was, shoulders squared, hair carefully set, standing beneath the portrait of a former Chief Justice. "I saw the papers," she said. "You really made it." I didn't flinch. I didn't soften. "You saw the surface," I said. "I lived every hidden page." I turned and walked past her without hesitation. She didn't follow. That night, the new dedication wall was unveiled just outside the appellate hearing room. Dozens of names were carved into the stone. Scholars, jurists, reformers. I traced my finger across my own name, Maura Donnelly. Beneath it was the inscription I'd chosen. Justice doesn't ask where you came from. It only asks if you came ready. I didn't linger. I had a hearing to prepare for. There wasn't another chapter after this. This was the verdict. And it stands.